Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to go, first of all, to a couple of topics that are relevant to videos I've done recently. First of all, to the live stream I did last night with Language Learner, a combat medic trainer near the front lines in Ukraine, a US humanitarian worker. Really great interview. Go and check that out on my live tab on my homepage. And I'm really excited that the fund that his organization has started up a new campaign. Started with $100 yesterday, is now at over $3,300 directly as a result of the video. That is absolutely amazing. So well done, guys. You are legends. So let's go to talk about, I guess, combat medical support in terms of what the Russians provide. This is a Criso Wiki thread. So Russian frontline hospitals are experiencing acute shortages of personnel and supplies. Only officers are reportedly evacuated to Russia, with ordinary soldiers being treated without anesthesia or medications. Volunteers are providing most of the medical supplies. The Insider reports on the calamitous state of Russian frontline medical care in the occupied regions of Ukraine. Simply getting to a medical facility is hard enough. Many have complained that the wounded are not being evacuated and are often left to die. Wounded soldiers are supposed to be stabilized and sent to the nearest military field hospital where they are triaged. They are then meant to be sent to regional hospitals to the occupied territories or in Russia, depending on severity of their injuries in the occupied region. In practice, only officers are reportedly sent back to Russia. Soldiers and NCOs are being treated within Ukraine, particularly since the Ukrainian counteroffensive began. Medical facilities there are so overwhelmed that schools and kindergartens are being used as hospitals. Even within Russia, hospitals are overwhelmed by injured men. Russia's decrepit healthcare system is a further obstacle. There are no computers. Everything is done by hand, and it reportedly takes 45 to 60 minutes to deal with each man. There is no digitization of records. Only a quarter of those queuing are actually being seen due to the very slow rate with which they are being processed. Quote, the guys line up before opening. As a result, after sitting all day, they cannot get an appointment. Volunteers crowdsource medical supplies on social media, quote, calls for help, photos of severed or almost severed limbs of soldiers in fundraising chats are alternate with jingoistic videos, pro-Russian videos from TikTok. Congratulations on Russia Day and other public holidays. The civilian hospital in Valuki in the Belgorod region is a main treatment center for Russian wounded, but lacks everything from wipes to prescription drugs. Doctors say they lack disinfectants such as chlorhexidine and hydrogen peroxide, solutions for IVs, tubes for decompression and gastrointestinal tract, drainage systems for the chest, gauze bandages, bandages and painkillers. Anesthetics are in short supply as well. The doctors have no tools. They ask volunteers to buy surgical scissors, clamps, staplers and staples for suturing wounds and internal organs, hemostatic sponges to stop bleeding, and tablets to determine the patient's blood group. The medics face particularly acute problems in dealing with amputations, which have become among the most common procedures they are having to perform due to the number of injuries caused by shelling and mine explosions. The number of amputations is also much greater than it should be. Soldiers are poorly trained in emergency aid and lack high quality tourniquets in their first aid kits. Tourniquets are often improperly applied, leaving no option but to amputate the injured limb. We talked a lot about tourniquets last night on the sorry, get my pronunciation all bizarre there. We talked a lot about tourniquets on the live stream last night and how important they are. They're like one of, if not the most important pieces of kit that make a huge difference to whether someone survives or doesn't. And if they survive, hey, they can, well, that's life, and you're actually valuing life intrinsically, and also from a purely practical military point of view, they can come back and fight again, possibly at some point in the future. But there you go. This problem has been acknowledged before by the Russian authorities, and the head of the Kalashnikov Center for Tactical Medicine, Artyom Katulin, has said that more than 30% of amputations were due to improper tourniquet application. Russian paramedics are often poorly trained. This is exactly what Language Learner was talking about last night, about getting decent training in so that they know what to do. And it makes a difference. Russian paramedics are often poorly trained, while medical training for ordinary soldiers is minimal. They are given only small, old fashioned, and often decades old medical kits, which are vastly different from Ukrainian equivalents. It's not to say Ukraine, as your man last night was saying, have fantastic kit across the board, and that is one of the challenges. According to Dmitry Trishkin, head of the Russian Ministry of Defense's military medical department, by December last year, approximately a quarter of the soldiers admitted to hospitals were in a serious or extremely serious condition. Half were moderately injured. However, this was before the start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive and the bloodiest stage of the Battle of Bakhmut, which have both caused a huge increase in Russian casualties. Figures are kept secret, but are certain to be high, in the tens of thousands. Hospitals themselves are often in poor condition due to a lack of investment. Some Russian hospitals are still using beds shipped to them by the British in 1945. They lack air conditioning and are stiflingly hot in summer, adding to the patient's discomfort. Russia's hospitals are frequently in poor condition, with mouldy, crumbling walls, filthy bedding, and unsafe buildings. As of 2019, over 41% had no central heating, and over 30% had no water. Half of Russia's hospitals closed between 2000 and 2015 for lack of funding. I mean, that's absolutely terrible. I have experience of Russian hospitals. I'll probably share the video I've done with my um, for my members, just explaining I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis, and that affects all of me, my mobility, my cognitive load and cognitive abilities, my grasp of language, things like pronunciation. Well, I used to be absolutely on point. I'm a linguistics. I've got a degree. I've got a language degree as one of my qualifications, and uh, that yeah, I struggle with a whole load of stuff now. So as a result, I decided to get the best treatment you can get for progressive multiple sclerosis. At the time in the UK, there were no drugs on the NHS. There is one now, but at the time there were none. This was 2018 to 19. So I was diagnosed with MS in August 2018, progressive MS in November 2018, and by March 2019, I had raised £40,000 and was in getting stem cell therapy in a hospital in Moscow. And the reason I went there is because they've been doing that treatment for MS for 20 years, and they're the best in the world. And that team, Dr. Fedorenko and his team, are absolutely amazing. Now that hospital was brilliant. Right, I went there expecting stuff like this. Well, I didn't go there expecting because I'd done my research. But when you initially think, "Oh, I'm going to go and get hospital treatment in Moscow," that hospital was better than any UK hospital I've ever seen, and the staff there was simply just brilliant, and the treatment was faultless, absolutely brilliant. But Russia's a big place, and different regions have different services, that different provisions, and I can imagine that outside of Moscow there would be hospitals like this. Uh, I don't know whether that's just my kind of biases and baggage I'm bringing in terms of thinking of old Soviet style existence. But these are the claims Chris Owicki is making here, and yeah, evidently, you can have brilliant hospital and brilliant provision in a capital city like Moscow and possibly St. Petersburg as well, but it may be very different elsewhere. Although volunteers have kept military hospitals going, donor fatigue appears to have set in. One Moscow region volunteer says people are tired of the special military operation. Every month, fewer people send us money. The amounts that people transfer have also decreased. The pro-Ukrainian incursion at Shebekino in May 2023 also diverted funds away from hospitals. A widespread volunteer effort helped the local inhabitants, many of whom lost their homes in the fighting. However, hospitals have lost out and their conditions have deteriorated. It's worth contrasting the dismal state of Russian military medicine to how the Ukrainians have tackled the challenge of treating the wounded. Ukraine's extensive pre-war planning gave it one of the highest number of hospital beds per capita in any country in the world. Ukrainian hospitals were told to increase bed numbers by 30% and keep them empty. There are now more than 8 beds in Ukraine for every million people, compared to 2.4 in Britain and an average of 5 across That's not right. It's not 8 per million. That means they've only got that's wrong. 8 they've got 40 million, so that 40 times 8, they've got more than 240 beds odd in Ukraine. So I think that statistic is incorrect. But you can imagine 8, 2.4 in Britain, and the average of 5 across the European Union. Paramedics receive extensive training. Although tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been wounded in the fighting, far fewer of them will have died or suffer from crippling injuries due to the higher standard of medical care. The Russians' bad medical outcomes have been self-inflicted and unnecessary. Uh, but that's not to say there aren't issues, as we learnt last night, with the Ukrainian situation. So the Ukrainians need an awful lot more training so that they can give that sort of trench triage, if you like, to in those platinum 5 minutes. It's really important early stages to stop the bleeding and allow someone to survive, to get to hospital, and then you've got the challenges of still getting them to hospital, so on and so forth. So it's not that it's this simple picture of everything's great in everything's awesome in Ukraine and everything sucks for Russia. Now, going on to another topic that I talked about yesterday, I think as well, in my extra, which is production of Russian kit. This is a claim from the Ukrainians themselves about the production of Russian missiles. In a month, Russia produces about 100 missiles of various types, said the deputy chief of the main operational department of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to him, the Russian Federation produces up to 60 air-launched missiles, including Kinzhal, up to 30 Kalibr missiles, more than 10 Iskander missiles. So that is not a massive amount, and they will be firing more than that on a monthly basis. It would be useful to actually look at those stats and see what they have fired, for example, in the last month, and see whether they are using more than they are producing. Right, a few bits. I actually included this in my frontline update, but I cut it out due to the frontline update video, therefore being too long. Right, let's indeed. I'm just going to publish that video that's now finished doing its thing. Stunning to see this map. Remember, the Russian army was supposed to be highly mobile and fast, and we get 10-mile advances in a year. It was supposed to advance more quickly than that in a day. Now, this, as Ilya Ponomarenko says, the front line of central Donbass now and a year ago, from the ending of the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and today, the result that required a massive mobilization and the insanity of the Bakhmut slaughter. Now, there are some gains here for the Russians and losses for the Russians. So the Ukrainians gained the whole of Kharkiv, the Russians lost the whole of Kharkiv, and they gained themselves over pretty much a year Bakhmut. I mean, this is it. This is what they gained in a year. Absolutely insane. And in fact, they've already lost significant portions of that already in a month at a rate that was faster than the rate that they took it. And these guys are supposed to be the second greatest army in the world. So it's about an understanding of perspective there, making sure that we have a good grasp of what is going on. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malyar really talking to the importance of striking behind occupied lines, behind Russian lines. We see everything, she says. Every day, the Ukrainian armed forces find and destroy the occupiers' warehouses and logistics hubs. Over the past 24 hours alone, 6 ammunition depots were destroyed in the Torod sector alone. This is our response to the enemy's frontal assaults. We are delivering effective, painful, targeted strikes, exsanguinating the occupier for whom the lack of ammunition and fuel will sooner or later become fatal. That's a key point. At some point, the lack of fuel and the lack of ammunition due to all the strikes on these warehouses and hubs and logistics lines will hurt. It will hurt the Russians. In modern warfare, logistical objectives are key. I can already tell you more about the hit on Makivka. This is a vivid example of the effective work of Ukrainian artillery that delivered the fire damage and aerial reconnaissance, which corrected the strike. A really large warehouse was destroyed. Actually, it wasn't. It was in the middle of a large building, wasn't it? Residential building, where a significant number of artillery shells and missiles for BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems were stored, to be continued. And of course, a day later, or within 24 hours, Makivka was hit again with a massive strike on some fuel tanks, causing really significant damage and a big old fire. The other infographic this time, or an infographic I wanted to show you, concerns the difference between the Russian and Ukrainian stocks in terms of equipment, and also where they started and where they're at now. So Russian tanks lost about 2,000. They started at 3,400. They got about 1,400 now. The Ukrainians started with almost 1,000 and now have 1,500. The Ukrainians now, according to this data analysis by Bloomberg, Oryx, IISS, and Kiel Institute, the claim is that the Ukrainians now have more tanks than the Russians. That is absolutely phenomenal. Heavy guns, so these are 152, 155 mil howitzers, 2.3 or 2,300. The Russians started with, they're now down to 1,900. They've lost way more than that. What I presume is they brought a load in from their stocks. The Ukrainians started with 773. They now have 1,100. So they're approaching parity or getting closer to parity. That's a figure I'd like to see because recently, last couple of months, the Russians have been absolutely hammered for their artillery. Heavy guns, yeah. Now onto MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems. Russians started with 1,100 down to 841. Ukrainians started with 350, now up to 430 odd, and that is again an improvement for the Ukrainians. That asymmetrical disadvantage, the gap is being closed across all the categories, and Ukraine, they are doing a pretty good job of both retaining equipment, repairing it, and getting new stuff from allies in a way that Russia simply aren't. Right, I'm going to go to a big old comment here from a Hungarian living in the Netherlands, and I appealed to my commenters and viewers here to give me their opinions if they were Hungarian on Viktor Orban on Hungary, because I'd made some claims. I was like, am I accurate? What do you guys think? And there's a mix of claims, and obviously it depends where you sit politically along the spectrum or in the political compass, depending on how you evaluate your political positioning. Here is someone who gives another viewpoint, and again, take this for what it is, which is a single person giving their political views. But I think it's a really interesting insight. Hi, Jonathan. I'm Hungarian living in the Netherlands. I really like your videos. Maybe I could explain to you a little bit about what is going on. So Orban got elected in 2013. His idea was building a better Hungary in the Eastern Europe, in the European Union. Sorry, of course it was a lie. There is an American document about Putin's people meeting with Orban after the election. Nobody knows what happened there, but after that, Orban started building Hungary the same way as Russia. Angela Merkel was the German leader at the time. It's important that German car brands started building their biggest factories in the country. Audi in Győr, Mercedes in Kecskemét. Long story short, Orban later started using this blackmailing Merkel. And she didn't do anything against that. Hungarians were demonstrating on the streets against the Orban regime, asking the EU to not send money to Orban because it doesn't go to the people, but for propaganda for his own party and to destroy opposition parties. Of course, EU leaders were different at this time, and Merkel was at the corner smiling next to Putin and Orban after taking Crimea illegally as well. So Hungarians who could do something against this regime left the country. Why? Because Orban was a politician from the communist era. He knows everything about how to destroy demonstrations and tools to break the opposite thinking people, destroying your family. You'll never have a job again in your profession, and you can easily lose your house, etc. Don't underestimate him. Of course, Putin was blackmailing Merkel as well because she built her whole career buying cheap oil from the Russians. This is my own statement, but in my opinion, Merkel was playing one of the biggest roles in creating the background for the Ukrainian war, and we speak incredibly less about her. This is something a lot of people feel very strongly about. She was that kind of appeasement, try and change Putin by taking him into the kind of globalized trade setup and saying, okay, one of the best ways of changing you is for you to become kind of one of us, and we'll change you by osmosis. But that didn't quite happen, and he just managed to position Russia in a way that the oligarchs and he made stupendous amounts of money getting people, getting other nations dependent upon Russian hydrocarbons. It's an interesting point about leaving a country being one of the only options. This is a problem when you have dictators. Effectively, that's how I see people like this. They're quasi dictators or dictators when they it's really hard to be opposition because if you're opposition, you get persecuted and thrown in prison or restricted in other ways, can't get a job, so on and so forth. So you end up leaving the country, and that leaves only a pliant population, population that's very compliant to what you want them to be. After the First World War, Hungary lost most of the territories with a lot of people, and that is a really sad part of Hungarian history, of course. And Orban uses this as a main card. Unfortunately, local governments like in Slovakia, Romania, and Ukraine, it's important that I really respect these nations and its people. This is not against the people; it is against the governments because I know they can live in peace with each other. Made terrible mistakes with these people. So these are the diaspora Hungarians, I would presume. Based on my experiences, I know stories how the police government treated them just because they were Hungarians. This created the Hungarian nationalism with aggressive, manipulative people who really helped Orban keep his title. Unfortunately, Ukraine wanted to close Hungarian schools. Of course, Orban's regime will use it against Ukraine for his own goals. And to be honest, if you want to be part of the EU, you can't close your minorities' schools and act with your neighbors like this. And it happened before the war. Nobody apologized from the Ukrainian government for this. I really support Ukraine in the war, but Ukrainian diplomacy made a huge mistake here. Be interesting to see which ruler that happened under. Um, but yeah, something to look into there. Hungarian government is not the people. Hungarian civilians always collect a lot of money for aid to Ukraine. Check the card page on Facebook where you can find evidence. Already 15 Hungarian soldiers have died in the Ukrainian war for fighting for their home. When the war started, Hungarian universities freely accepted Ukrainian students, accepting families and helping them. Now, until nowadays, a lot of Ukrainian citizens live in Hungary and we treat them well. I feel that, and in my opinion, that's why you get angry Hungarian messages. Media only focuses on Orban, not what Hungarian civilians do to help Ukraine. And that's a really good point of why I wanted to solicit true Hungarian views, ideally from a variety of different sources and positions. Orban only cares for the power. He actually thinks that Russia will win the war. That's why he acts like this. He knows that we will not leave the EU and NATO because that will be his last day as prime minister, especially in Budapest. They really stand next to the EU. Most of Orban voters come from the poor countryside regions like Eastern Hungary. Orban, I mean, this is very, very normal for fascistic, and I say fascistic as not to say Orban is a fascist or his government is a fascist government, but moving towards that position, like hyper nationalist uh, governments. It's really common to appeal to the bucolic. It's kind of make your country great again, the mythical past. Uh, and you appeal very often to your rural communities to do that. The urban centres is where you have sexual degeneracy and where you have the melting pot of society, and it's all urban areas are liberal and horrible. We want to appeal to the pure people in the country. You saw this in the Second World War. You've seen this numerous times. I really advise anyone out there to read Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works. It's a really good book, and it's a really easy to read quick book. And he has 10 pillars of fascism, or 10 pillars that get you to fascism. And that's one of them, the bucolic heartlands, appealing to the bucolic heartlands. And you'll see this. Here's what Putin does that. Places like St. Petersburg and Moscow are not friends of Putin. Like traditionally, those are the centers where you get most reaction against Putin. And it's outside of those areas when you start going to industrial towns or into the rural regions that you start getting much more support for autocratic leaders, traditional leaders, or hyper nationalistic kind of politics. So that's one of the pillars that Jason Stanley talks about in his book. Anyway, to return to this, he is saying so. Yeah, most of Orban's voters come from poor countryside regions like Eastern Hungary. Orban doesn't have the power in the EU to do significant things. He just speaks and turns where he can get bigger power. If the war will end with the Ukrainian victory, Orban will not have a decision. He has to go back to the EU. Obviously, there's English is not their first language, so make of that what you will. I think it's Orban will have no choice. I think that means Orban will have no choice but to go back to the EU with his tail between his legs. I guess, as far as I'm concerned, I understand Orban is a terrible leader and a person. However, he has no power. The Hungarian military sucks. The economy is not significant. His veto doesn't work, and he has no real power. My question is why we don't speak about what Macron, Scholz, and Merkel do. They are much more dangerous than Orban. They have military, strong economies. Macron often flies to China and is calling Putin to speak about peace talks and stopping the war. Maybe he gives something to Ukraine, but it is still a really small amount, although he could change the way of the war. Not to mention Germany, where they were waiting months to send military aid to Ukraine, but of course, really small amounts too. I would disagree with that last part because I think actually fundamentally France and Germany have shifted their positions. I think you could get away with saying that earlier on in the war, but right now, rhetorically, Macron has really done a volte-face. He's changed his opinion and he's like, no, we can't negotiate. Where he was trying to be that broker to help negotiate. So whether France are giving enough military equipment is another question. They give things on the sly, you don't hear about it a lot, but they also contribute one of the largest amounts to the EU budget. So when the EU gives a lot of stuff to Ukraine, actually France is responsible for something like 25% or 20% of that. So it's really easy to dismiss Macron and Scholz, but actually, Scholz with Pistorius now in charge, I think of the defense German defense ministry, I think things have changed. But yeah, that criticism can still be leveled very, very securely at such people, no doubt. Thank you very much for great content, so on and so forth. So thank you, really appreciate that. When I look at my comments through the YouTube studio, it doesn't give the proper name, so I can't. It says user H1 HJ1 blah 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 blah. So I thank you, user. I really appreciate that comment. It's eye-opening, and it's great to get opinions from different places and from people who are the people I'm talking about. In this case, Hungarians. I can cast my opinion on Hungary and Hungarians, but it'll be largely based on what I'm deriving from the media. And as this person says, that can often be incorrect. Going on to something really quick, bit of Trump. I just thought I'd show you this because we're dealing with military and politics. Here we have Trump saluting a North Korean general, July the 4th, hashtag July the 4th. Just a really bizarre thing to do. And we know that he loves himself a good strongman leader. But yeah, don't go and the general's offering his hand, but he's getting saluted to by Trump. Yeah, bizarre. Anyway, I'll just throw that one in there. And we're going to go quickly to see some demining. This is actually, I've wanted to see this. This is a demining vehicle doing its job. And this is a kind of mine plow or similar going over a minefield and detonating a mine. Oh, I had a little jump there. Now, the question for me, I wonder if anyone can answer this, is whether that would disable this plow. I mean, it's obviously that's the intention. It's intended to set off a mine and it blows this, but I presume this is either easily replaceable or it can carry on doing that and take 2 or 3 hits before that you need to replace bits and pieces. I don't know if anyone can let me know how many mines these kind of plows can take before they fall apart, or how much fixing they need doing in their operation. Okay. And I'm going to show you an anti-shade system. This looks like a bunch of Kalashnikovs strapped together in some kind of firing system that is a little bit of engineering ingenuity. I would love to see that being fired, to be honest, but you don't get to see it being fired, which is a real shame. That'd be awesome. So that's pretty clever. It reminds me, right, when I was at school, right, and you had to write lines, you'd done something wrong. I mean, I know you're thinking you never did anything wrong. You were the perfect child, poster boy. but when you did things wrong, you had to write lines, right? And you had to write 200 lines on lined paper or whatever. I must not, blah, blah, blah. I must not. And he used to spend time getting like 6 pencils in a row, and you wire them together so they're all in a row. Like really difficult to hold it, and you'd write a bit. It's probably quicker to just write 6 lines, but it was just I'm cheating the system here, and I'm writing with 6 pencils or 3 pencils or 2 pencils, however you could do it, and you'd be able to write 3 lines at once or 6 lines at once. Actually, brilliant. Used to love that. Uh, yes. Well, actually, yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a random aside. And the last thing I'm going to show is a Gepard. Now, Gepard, this is going 130 kilometers an hour. Gepards are actually, the translation of Gepard is cheetah, I believe, probably for this reason. We'll turn the sound off though. That is coming from inside the car. That is absolutely pegging it. This Gepard is really, really fast. So that's fantastic. That's why it's called the Cheetah. I'm not quite sure why you would need to go that fast, but it can go that fast. So yeah, I guess that's good. Anyway, that's the end of today's smorgasbord of delights. Please leave your opinion on anything I've said. Do so respectfully, and let's discuss these things. And I really appreciate all the support you've given to the Global Augmentation GoFundMe page. It's incredibly moving. That whole interview was, I think, really, it was candid, it was interesting, and it gave you an insight from almost the front line there. Just really great. So thanks for your support for that one. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.